Hello, y'all. This is Ross McKnight, and you're listening to the Farm in the Backwater podcast. And this is the first one. I wanted to introduce myself, the farm, my family, and talk a little bit about some topics, some lessons learned. Like, for instance, why would you go into farming? To save the planet, to regenerate the land, to have a job that you enjoy doing every day, to feed your community because it's fun, etc., etc., etc. Like, what are the reasons why one might actually go into farming? Because there are a lot of reasons not to. Like, for instance, generally speaking, it's very difficult to make a good living according to American standards. It's very challenging work. You're going to work more hours and you're going to work harder than pretty much anyone that you know. And so there will be no experiential overlap with a lot of the people in your age group who live in your area, which means that they're not really your peers, right? You'll have a hard time finding peers, people that you can share those experiences with, for example. What else are we going to talk about? We'll talk about, like, the land in general as this sort of ideal place, like an Eden or a sort of like an Atlantis, like this place where this idea where if we go back to the land, everything's going to be okay again in our lives. It's going to heal us. The land as a sort of like golden realm, if you will. And as you heard my son screaming in the background, sometimes there are threats. And those might be your siblings. So the other thing is sort of like what is tradition, and what is the value of tradition in terms of agriculture and the agrarian life in general? In other words, what is the point of the agrarian life? And how does the concept of tradition fit into that? But to start at the beginning, I'll tell you a little bit about myself and my family. I'm 32 years old. We started this farm in 2019 during some pretty intense medical crises that I was experiencing. I have an autoimmune disease and was having a lot of surgeries, really invasive surgeries. I was what you would probably call medically disabled for a while. And I had been working in finance, which led me to thankfully having a private disability insurance policy at the time. And so I was able to make it through that period, financially speaking. But I had already had a plan to set out and to start a farm 3 years after I began my career in personal finance. And I had told the hiring manager that. So I think everything was out in the air there, out in the open there. So that ended up happening, and it happened it was kind of catalyzed, almost the issue was forced, right, by all these medical problems. And so I didn't know exactly where to go as far as the niche I wanted to work in, because at the time, pasture-raised chicken was all the rage. Everybody was doing it. It was kind of like the easy, or at least viewed as the easy entry, low cost of entry, and also entry-level enterprise in small-scale farming. But again, everyone was doing it, and it felt like kind of a race to the bottom. So we had these friends who had recently moved from the south of France, and one of them is French. And they introduced us to foie gras, which is such a delectable product. And so being kind of the person who wants to look for a challenge and see if I can overcome it, I started to research foie gras and see what foie gras production was like in the United States. Found that there really was not too much foie gras production in the United States. Didn't understand especially why there was no foie gras production in Louisiana, given our patrimony, our French patrimony. And so I thought that it was something, part of our cultural patrimony, that I should endeavor to bring to Louisiana. And so that's kind of how Backwater Foie Gras, which is the name of our commercial enterprise, our farm, a commercial farming enterprise, started off. and we started with 3 ducks actually in our backyard. That didn't work out too well. We got a good bloodline of 20 Muscovies that we then tried and produced some really beautiful foie gras, surprisingly, in our second go round. And so we decided that since that was possible, we produced some really nice product, that we should go ahead and go for it. And so together with my parents, we bought a property in the country, and the rest is kind of history. Got a pretty big family, quite a number of kids, growing up here on the farm and enjoying the experience more than they could possibly know at this stage in their life, which I think is best, because if they knew how precious these moments were, then they would feel too pressured to appreciate them. And so I'm glad that they don't have to think too much about that and just experience a beautiful day on our beautiful pastures every day. Praise be to God. So that's a little bit about us, and I'm sure you'll learn more about us if you're interested as we go along with this podcast. But I want to cover these topics because I think, especially in an introductory podcast, these are topics that are, well worth covering for anyone out there who is interested in farming in any way, interested, whether it's just producing a little bit of your own food in your backyard, whether you want to change your life completely and go into agriculture, or whether you are just a person who enjoys eating well and wants to understand and values the moral connection with your food and with the animals that provide your food. So these are really lessons learned from my perspective, lessons also I'm still learning. I'm no guru and I'm no expert on these things. This is just my experience and the way that I see things. And the first question that I wanted to cover was, why would one farm? And we discussed a few of those reasons, like, do I want to farm because I think that I can improve the state of the earth or the environment by using particular methods? Do I think that I can save or regenerate the soil, right, which has been degraded by, as we like to think, irresponsible farming habits or practices? Do I think that it's a fun idea? It's cool. Like, look at all these people going and starting these little farms. Like, that's really neat. Seems like a cool lifestyle. I'd like to have that, work outside where the sun's shining, can be out in nature, be out in creation, and kind of have that beautiful experience every day, get that vitamin D, right? Do I want to do it because I want to save my soul, right? Because the modern life, the rat race, whatever you want to call it, corporate world is soul-sucking, and also it's oftentimes unethical, almost as sort of like a matter of course, right? Sort of like things are done, immoral things are done without anybody really thinking about it or considering that these things might be, in fact, gravely immoral. And then we have, do I want to do something beautiful? Do I want to do something good for my fellow man? Do I want to share something beautiful? Do I want to leave a legacy? Do I want to participate in God's gift-giving nature? Because all of creation is a gift. It's not necessary. It's not necessary for us to be here. And so that's a gift, right? Just the fact that we exist is a gift. So do I want to participate in that in a very intimate way? Because creation is a book that we can read to learn more about God. And if we're involved in some way in the dominion, the proper management, right, the caring for creation, then we're involved in that gift giving in a very intimate, very close way, because God made the heavens and the earth, made all of creation, and this was sort of his gift, right? He wanted us to see that gift in the woods, the fields, the trees, the flowers, the herbs, the animals, right? So agriculture is so close to God's charity, right? God's like really intense, insistent charity to just give us the whole book of creation for us to read. So, or do I just want to do something worth doing? And I think all the other reasons are not really sustainable, right? So the reasons I mentioned at the beginning, that is like to save the planet, to regenerate the land, to have a job that you like, to feed your community, to do it because it's fun or it's cool, it's entertaining, it's interesting. The reasons that are sustainable are, to raise reasonable human beings and to pass on a tradition, to leave a legacy, to participate in the gift-giving nature of God, to do something that is in fact sort of quintessentially human. If you read Genesis, God literally gives us this job, if you will, this vocation of agriculture and animal husbandry. He says, take dominion and till and keep it, referring to the earth. That is like, God doesn't tell anyone to become a stockbroker. He doesn't tell anyone to become a banker. He doesn't tell anyone to become a real estate agent. I'm not like judging anyone who does those things. There's so many reasons why you might end up doing that with your life that aren't necessarily, that are not due to malice. But God, this is the one, what I'm saying is that this is the one vocation that God gives us directly. He says, go and do this. And so he knew that would fulfill our nature in a unique way. So I guess what I am saying is that the land is not a silver bullet to fix all of our problems. I know it hasn't been for me. I've experienced the whole range of human emotions and suffering while farming. It has not been a career, I would say. It's not a career. Farming is not a career. Farming is not comparable to any other trade, even, I would say. Because it's so completely and utterly dependent on the cycles of nature, which means that you in turn must be utterly dependent on God and trusting in God in order to make it through each day, each week, each year. And if your reasons for farming are other than just really participating in the human life as it was granted to us, and kind of trusting that all of our desires are attuned to this way of life, all of our needs are fulfilled in this way of life in maybe ways that we don't expect. Like, for instance, I can think of people who might be childless and they want to save the planet, and that's why they're farming. Excuse me. It's like, at that point, who's it for? Because if the paradigm is such that, we have two people and they want to save the planet for saving the planet's sake, and they don't want to have children, then when they die, if that paradigm for them is some kind, that's what they've decided is their ultimate good, that paradigm, then if we apply that exponentially, right, if we apply that in every scenario, then no one's left to inherit anything that's been done. And animals are merely sentient, so they can't intellectualize any of this, like this ideology of saving the planet. They can't intellectualize that. They can't think, oh, I'm so grateful that, John and Jill, sacrificed their lives so that I could have a few extra blades of grass to eat. They don't experience anything like that. Only humans do. And the fact that animals are sentient merely almost indicates that they need intellects to guide their activities. And so all of this has to be ordered towards, at the end of the day, our own salvation, the salvation of our children, and also doing what is good, what is true, and what is beautiful. And those things, of course, all go together. But if you have a disordered relationship, with the earth, or with your family, or with the idea of children, or with let's just say your significant other, you're not married to someone of the opposite sex who is free to marry, or you're avoiding having children or running away from God in any number of ways, the path is wide, right? That leads to perdition. If you have a disordered relationship in your life, if you have a disordered relationship with yourself, then the land's not going to fix it. We can't look at it as a silver bullet. Can't look at it as a mend all, as this remedy for all problems in the world and in our lives. If we all just go back to the land and start doing traditional natural farming, in ways that heal the land, and we share everything that we have, we have to understand sort of the spirit of that economy. And I use the word economy in a less concrete monetary way. I'm talking about like the economy of relationships and of the land and of like, for instance, our relationship with God, the economy of our relationship with God, which really finds its ultimate expression in the heart of the Middle Ages, which I'm sure will be a future podcast. But so much to say that don't run to farming to heal your problems. Don't do that, because you're going to experience bigger problems. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. And if you ask anybody who's a first-generation farmer, they'll tell you the same. It's the hardest thing they've ever done, because it's hard every day, and there's very little relief. And there's the level of endurance expected from you in order to simply accomplish feeding your family, selling some products, and making it to the next season is unbelievable. And in fact, almost like completely unimaginable to the ordinary average Joe commuting to their office job. And that's, again, why it can be a very lonely profession. So you really have to have your reasons straight. You have to have your motivation straight. And my motivation, one of my motivations is tradition. What I mean by tradition is passing on what I myself have received. The tradition of foie gras is so beautiful, for instance. It's been around for longer than we even really know. The earliest record of foie gras production is in Egyptian hieroglyphs on the wall of some tomb. And you have some Egyptian servants taking pellets of grain and dropping them down hollow reeds into the esophagi of geese. So it's extremely old and an extremely beautiful tradition, despite what PETA has to say about it. They don't really know anything. I don't even know where they get their pictures, because they seem to have these really horrific examples of foie gras production, which don't make sense to me, because if I were to mistreat my animals that badly, then I wouldn't actually be able to survive as a farmer. I wouldn't make any money. I wouldn't be able to pay bills, because my animals wouldn't be healthy and happy. So, for those of you who might think otherwise, in order to pay the bills and make ends meet, your animals need to be healthy and happy if you're a livestock farmer. But I look at tradition as a great motivation, because it allows me in this really interesting way to kind of tap into the infinitude of God's imagination. Because there are things that we know about foie gras farming, and there are things that we know about, for instance, like charcuterie, and there are all kinds of things that we know about carpentry. And that we don't know because of the great loss of the crafts and the trades over the last 2 generations, especially in North America. Anyway, those bits of knowledge we have that we can't necessarily quantify, like we can't explain them. We can't explain why we do X, Y, or Z necessarily. We just know that that's the right way to do it, and that if you do it another way, that you're not going to end up with the product you're seeking. So there's a lot of intuition in other words, that comes through the generations. It becomes intuition. At some point, it's like a point of fact, right? Or like maybe it's known more scientifically, more mathematically, like, okay, if I cook the corn this way and it has this consistency, then this is what produces foie gras. Now we just know, like, don't change. We do know, in that case, we know, well, it's eminently digestible for the ducks. But what we don't know, that you don't necessarily have to know that. If you just do what your father told you, if he was a foie gras farmer and you cook the corn a certain way so that it has this consistency when you push through it with your thumbnail, push through a kernel with your thumbnail, and you just do it that way and you just trust him, then you're going to have a good product at the end of the day when the ducks eat that corn. So tradition is kind of like trust, and it's beauty, and it's also this infinitude of knowledge, where if we lose a certain tradition, we've lost not just whatever we would have learned from the previous generation, but what thousands of years, and maybe 20 generations, 30, 40, 50 generations could have taught us. So that's the crazy thing, and that's why it's so important to pass on the tradition. Another example of that is the traditional Roman rite, right, which is in Latin, but it's not just in Latin. It's not the same as the modern Mass and the vernacular in English. I'm talking about the Catholic Mass. And there are so many things that are done, and you might not know in the pew exactly like what are all these, like every single movement that happens in the Mass, the choreography of the Mass, every single word of the Mass. You might not ever know all of those things, but if you were to look into it, you would find that there's a reason for every single one of those movements and every single word that is spoken that is extremely significant and profound and has a depth, a weight of meaning. So anyway, so that's why I want to farm, and especially why I want to produce foie gras, which is kind of an art. It's agriculture, but it's also sort of an artisan craft. It's ephemeral. It's not like sculpting a Greek column or something like that, or a statue out of marble. It's ephemeral, so it's the artisan's work. But it's still a thing of beauty that can be appreciated for its nuance and its delicacy. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and let me know what you think in the comments below. Of course, you can like, subscribe. Don't hit the notification bell because we all have lives outside the internet. And yeah, you can always check me out on our website, backwaterduckfarm.com, backwaterfoiegras.com. We have an Instagram at Backwater Foie Gras. Those are all the ways that you can follow us. I hope you have a wonderful day. May God bless you. Ave Maria.